welcome to the breakout on building a hydrogen economy. So we have Maggie Hanna presenting today. We've asked her to speak on, what is the opportunity, how big is it, and what is needed to turn this into an economic engine for Alberta and for Canada. Mm-hmm. So Maggie has been a fellow of the Energy Futures Lab for the past 3 or 4 years. She's president of Common Ground Energy and also an associate of Canadian Energy Systems Analysis and Research. Maggie's an innovation and technology scout, particularly around the technology needed in a low or zero emission future. She's a futures thinker, certainly a very big-hearted person and a wise woman. So I know you'll enjoy hearing from Maggie. Over to you, Maggie.
All right. Thanks, Allison. Well, welcome everybody. In the next 15 minutes, I hope you'll take a stroll with me through a future vision of what Alberta can look like that includes hydrogen exports from Alberta to the world as part of the energy transition. So why energy transition? Well, the pace of change in this world is increasing. And it is the #1 dominant factor in business today. No sensible decision, especially a business decision, can be made any longer without taking into account not only the world as it is, but the world as it will be. Otherwise, we strand assets. Not a good thing. So, so why hydrogen? Well, the #1 reason is climate change. And the world is moving ahead with climate change mitigation types of initiatives, and that very much includes low carbon electricity grid and hydrogen. Now, we have to move our CO2 emissions up the supply chain from where we sit as consumers. And that's because the oil and gas industry only emits about 20% of the total CO2 into the atmosphere that's associated with hydrocarbons and hydrocarbon fuels. And the rest, the 80%, is emitted by us, we consumers, through our tailpipes and our house stacks and our buildings and our industry. So if we can move that CO2 emission up the supply chain to where it is consolidated and where we can economically and easily deal with it, that's what hydrogen does for us. When you burn hydrogen, the only emission is water. So oil and gas companies think they're in the energy business, but they're really not. We are really in the transportation business. And I say that because 70% of every barrel of oil worldwide is transport fuel. It's diesel, it's gasoline, it's jet fuel, it's bunker for shipping. And 70% is transport fuel. And that transport fuel is being supplanted by battery electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. Trains, buses, ships, ferries, etc. right? And airplanes are coming. So that's the deal. And as a result of that, it's going to be chronic under demand, our oil profits are going to go down. And that will risk our jobs in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan that are related to the oil patch, and our prosperity. Next. But there is a really big international push right now for that countries are adopting hydrogen and they don't have enough. So we have a big export possibility here for Canada, and the countries that are importing, Japan's a big one. They've taken their first shipments from Australia already. South Korea, China, UK, Netherlands, and the USA are all looking at importing hydrogen. Next. And just for clarity for the rest of our conversation, there's really three kinds of ways to make hydrogen, and they have color names. So gray hydrogen is what we do today. And gray hydrogen is made from methane, natural gas, mixed with water, put into a big box at 800 degrees C, and off comes hydrogen and almost pure CO2, which in gray hydrogen, we just poop off into the atmosphere. And this is what we're doing today mostly, and a lot of this, but then there's blue hydrogen, and blue hydrogen is when we take the CO2 that's almost pure, and instead of pooping it off into the atmosphere, we catch it and we put it down a well bore into at least 2 kilometers down, ideally, and it dissolves into the salt water down there, and it's done for good. Green hydrogen is what Quebec is really good at, also Ontario, also Manitoba, and this is, they're having a big push towards green hydrogen, which is taking electricity from renewable sources like wind and solar and hydro, and breaking water into its 2 component pieces, one which is hydrogen and one which is pure oxygen. And that's another way to make, that's called green hydrogen. So next. So why would Alberta want to get into the blue hydrogen game with some green hydrogen thrown in for good measure? Well, because we have the existing resources right now that we can leverage to make this happen. We have abundant, stranded, cheap natural gas. We have a highly skilled and motivated workforce, and it wouldn't take much retraining in order to get them up to speed on the hydrogen game. We have existing know-how on how to make hydrogen, how to sequester it. We've done it already. We already know how to move things in pipelines. We've done it already. We know how to make a hydrogen pipeline. We've done it already. So this is existing knowledge that we have right now. Now, we also have existing steam methane reformers. That's what SMR stands for. And these are these big boxes. Would somebody mute themselves who's clearing their throat, please? So we have these SMRs that are awesome, and we can build more. We have pipelines already. We have CCS, or carbon capture and sequestration. We've done it. We have the Shell Quest project, which is an awesome project and still has about 3/4 of it is got room for more CO2 to put into the ground there. And we have nice thick salt in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, where we can wash out salt caverns and store hydrogen. It's a great, cheap way to store hydrogen already. Next. And more of all of these things are needed if we want to export hydrogen from Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan. And that means quality jobs, good work for people here in these provinces. So how big is this opportunity really? Well, right now we export, Alberta, just looking at Alberta now, we export 9 times the energy that we use locally in the province, 9 times. And that's in the form of oil, mostly, with some gas in terms of the money we get for those things. And in return for exporting all that energy, we get in return about $92 billion a year, something like that. And that's what Alberta's prosperity is really built on. Next. And so in the future, if I was going to like wave a magic wand, and I'm not saying that, this is just for reference. I'm not saying we're going to do this. We're just going to wave a magic wand here. What if we turned all of those gigajoules, all that energy, 9 times what we use in the province, we turned that from oil and gas into hydrogen energy, same amount of energy? What would that get us in back? And if it's on a wholesale basis, it will make us $150 billion a year. And if it's on a retail basis, it'll be $250 billion a year. And that, and of course, there's a mixture of retail and wholesale in our business. So it'll be somewhere north of 150 and south of 250 billion a year, which is more, 1.5 to 2 times more than 92 billion a year. So this is a very lucrative opportunity. Next. So what's our problem? Well, hydrogen is one of those things that is a chicken or egg thing, right? Why would anybody in a supply chain want to build hydrogen distribution and production and compression if they didn't have a market? Why would you take that risk? And why would a market form if there wasn't any hydrogen supply? Like, I love those Mirai cars, but I will not buy one because I can't fuel it here. You know, those Mirais are hydrogen fuel cell cars. So what are we going to do about this thing? And in this cartoon, I kind of like, it's not the chicken, it's not the egg, it's the deli, right? We have to bring both along at the same time. How the heck are we going to do that next? Well, here's a proposal. Here's a thought. Imagine with me that we had a hydrogen mission in Alberta, Alberta led. This is the, where most of the oil companies are. So hydrogen mission led in Alberta for that includes BC and Saskatchewan in the coalition, and Canada gets its poop in a group and puts together a hydrogen strategy for the country. Now there are 18 countries in the world, mostly in European Union and Southeast Asia, who have already done humongous amounts of work on hydrogen strategies. And it's, where's Canada in this? And how are we going to pay for that? Well, I think oil and gas profits, for one. I know that seems like a misnomer today, but the oil price will come back to some degree for a short period of time before it goes down and stays down, in my estimation. So oil and gas profits, federal and provincial stimulus money, and green investment money. A lot of money that has investment money is looking for green investment as we speak. And we're going to have to change our policies radically. And we cannot have regulatory uncertainty anymore holding up these projects. We have to fast track them. So that's on the government side. On the production side, hydrogen, most of it will be produced for export at large hydrogen production facilities. I think the first one needs to go in at the industrial heartland. Why? Because it has all the pieces we need to make that economic and really robust. It has natural gas supply resilience already. Lots of pipelines go there. It has carbon capture and sequestration already happening there into deep saline aquifers. It has great thick salts. The thickest salts in the province of Alberta are there, and a lot of salt caverns to store a lot of things, and that can be hydrogen as well. Next. Pipelines. Now we have to get our Canadian head around the fact that this energy transition is going to require way more pipelines than, not less, because we're going to be moving a lot of other gases around from place to place to make this work. So we're going to be moving not just methane, that we move now. We're also hydrogen, CO2, oxygen, ammonia, and methanol. And any pipelines that we build right now from here forward have to be hydrogen capable. That just means that they're made out of a nickel alloy, not a carbon, and not so much carbon in the steel. Next. And as far as Canada is concerned, Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC will all be producing various forms of hydrogen. And that's just today. And all of these provinces must have access to both oceans, both the Atlantic and also the Pacific Oceans. And that will happen, I hope, by a government stimulus for an east-west or west-east energy corridor. And part of that is going to be hydrogen pipelines going both ways, so that anybody can put hydrogen in to get it to one market or to the other market, and anybody along the way can take out hydrogen to run their provinces as well and pay for that. Hydrogen can move both as a liquid and also as a gas. And in this corridor as well, we should build in high voltage direct current lines, hydrocarbon export lines for crude, and also for refined products like diesel and gasoline, methane, and also methane with hydrogen in it, ammonia, great way to move hydrogen, and data fiber, so fast communication right across the whole country. And all of this stuff is underground in pipelines. And that's because we're moving into a weather weirding time, and we will protect and be more resilient if this is underground and not, faced with ice storms and things. Maybe water, I don't know about that yet. We'll see how the weather weirding goes. And then we're going to need a bunch of natural gas, liquid natural gas plants, LNG plants on both coasts, and they have to be hydrogen capable, and so that we can load up ships with LH2 or liquid hydrogen and ship that off to jurisdictions where we have agreements and markets. Next. And the tricky bit in this whole thing is that it is time sensitive. We need our oil and gas companies who have the know-how, who will have some profits to play with down, not immediately, but down the line. And we need them to step up to this plate and to actually engage with this. And if we wait too long, then there won't be profits in oil companies in order to make this happen. So it's critical. But then the question is, well, why would an oil company say, oh, I'm going to go into hydrogen when I'm already making great profits on oil, right? It's because you're not looking past 4 quarters. So to facilitate this whole thing, what we're doing at CESAR is we launched the Transition Accelerator. And this is very cool. It is a pan-Canadian, across Canada, not-for-profit charitable organization. We have a lot of good donors. And the idea is that we need to identify and build transition pathways that will accelerate our movement to net zero. And so the Transition Accelerator is designed to support techno-economic and environmental analysis. So we're all about technical and scientific rigor here. And we'll be bringing together coalitions of industry, government, academia, societal groups, and spin out consortia that then will move off on their own and do what they're designed and tasked to do. Our philosophy is that we're going to be solving major business and social challenges with credible, compelling, and capable pathways. Now, that can also address a greenhouse gas problem. What we're finding is that if you just want to address a greenhouse gas problem just by itself, you can't find the investment or the people willing to do that. But if you have a bunch of pain points that really bug people, and you can solve those pain points at the same time as reducing GHG emissions, then they're very interested. We have a pathway focus. So that means we're not looking at less than about 100 million tons a year. That's the scale we're looking at. And the 4 areas of investment that we're looking into that we support are freight transport and hydrogen economy, personal mobility, interjurisdictional electricity trade, and agri-food. Those are some of the big emitters where there's some big problems. So we have funding, and we'll be funding evidence-based studies, exploring these pathway alternatives, and then we'll be coordinating and launching industry-led pilots, demos, and commercialization initiatives. That's the plan. And next. So as a last thought here, just good policy cushions the blow of an economic shock, but great policy accelerates long-needed structural change. Sometimes things need to fall apart before they can fall together in a better way. And even though we can't precisely predict the future, we can create it. So I look forward. I know that's a lot to digest. It's probably pushing your buttons like crazy, some of you. But I'm really looking forward to your questions. And I'm going to turn it back over to Allison now.
Maggie, maybe you know, I can either sort of ask you these, or I know you can see them there, and let's just start kind of going down,
Sure,
and
absolutely.
then as we get farther down, then we can just sort of, given time, we can sort of pick off. You can pick off the ones you feel you can best answer. But let's start with this one here.
So this is Bruce's question, and what analogs have you looked at in other nations? Example, H2 initiatives in the UK. We are not leaders in this field. We are playing catch up, and that is so true. I really look to the UK as a way to make this happen in a good way, because they've got projects. So one of them I really like is the Keele University in the UK. And they just decided we're going to have the Keele University run on pure hydrogen, no methane at all, and green electricity, and we're going to set that up. Now, once you have that in place, backed by the government, then the supply chain can say, well, you know, Keele University, that's a sort of a smallish kind of a project, but because it's guaranteed for at least 30 years, I'm going to get in bed with them. I'm going to produce hydrogen over here, and my buddy over here is going to compress it, or well, compression is not a good way to do it, but is going to pipeline it over to the university, and then these guys are going to distribute it in such a way, and I'll take that risk, right? So that's why it's so critical for government to get involved in this, to provide the backstop for these things. Another example is out of California, where there's a legislation saying that if you put in a hydrogen fueling station, and it's going to cost X dollars, we'll make sure that you get hydrogen credits or low carbon credits to make sure that you can pay off that investment within 5 years, even if you don't have a single car or a truck come to load up your hydrogen. And once you are economic, then we switch to another model which you get carbon credits for providing hydrogen out of your service station, which is now economic, right? So those are two examples of how good policy can really help this along. I hope that answers your question, Bruce.
Thank you, Maggie. That was great. A whole wealth of knowledge to draw on. I mean,
I have a really high forehead for that reason.
So there's a question here about new technologies to produce hydrogen from hydrocarbon reservoirs. For example, like the technology that Proton Technologies is developing, and a comment of, you know, is that it's likely cheaper than the blue option. Anything you could say about that, Maggie?
Well, I really like Proton Technologies. Grant Strem is a friend of mine, and this is not a slam dunk yet, you know. There's a lot of things, a lot of steps between looking awesome on paper, having done all of the lab work that can possibly be done. Now they have to test it in the field. And as a geologist myself, I recognize there's only certain kinds of geologies that are going to work for this. For example, you need a very widespread reservoir that goes out in lots of directions, good permeability, because you're making gases from this underground combustion that have to go somewhere. And so you can't just put it, if you have just a little point bar, small little reservoir, then you don't want to be building up the pressure in there. You want the pressure to be able to migrate. But it is such a high benefit possibility that we really have to do this experiment, and we have to get some money to those guys. I think they need $3 million to do it. I'm not confident in the kind of numbers they're talking about, around 10 to 50 cents a kilogram production. Maybe that's it, but there's a lot to be figured out on that still. And we have to figure it out because the potential is so high. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah.
I know you had commented on some policy changes in relation to some of the examples from other nations, but just looking at this top voted question here, anything else you would say around that, around specific policy changes and regulations that would support the hydrogen economy?
Sure. In Alberta here, right now, for example, we're only allowed to put 2% hydrogen into a natural gas pipeline. It's regulated. That's the limit. But Australia is putting in 10%, and they've got some approval for 15%. And Germany's putting in 20%, and the Netherlands has doing some experiments with 30%. Now, there's some issues with putting hydrogen in a natural gas pipeline, and one of them is hydrogen cracking. And so there's been a new study done to say at what point, what concentration of hydrogen are we going to start cracking our pipelines, right? If we don't make them hydrogen ready. And that number they come up with is about 25%. Now, I'd use 20. I wouldn't go higher than 20. And I would say for the Alberta, BC and Saskatchewan pipelines, I would say let's do 10. Let's do 10. Let's start with 10. We can put 10% hydrogen in our natural gas pipelines that goes to our houses. It doesn't mess with your furnace or your stove at all. 10% will not. 15% won't either. But 10% is real safe. And so so that's one of the big changes I would make. And another policy change is we have a lot of solar and wind going in the provinces, and the grid can't take that electricity all the time. So it's like wasted. So instead of wasting that electricity, let's turn it into hydrogen, and then we would need a government to say, policy-wise, we're going to allow and set up feed-in tariffs. So people who have a solar field can make hydrogen when their electricity isn't being sold into the grid, and they can sell that hydrogen into the natural gas pipeline. So there's a couple of examples.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Maggie. So there's a question been posed. You had commented around the necessity of the oil and gas industry to get involved in this. So someone's asking here, to what extent that oil and gas companies have engaged in this idea already. What do you think there?
That's a good question. Yeah, to the extent that it serves them, of course, right? Which is 80% of the hydrogen that's made in all of Canada is used in refineries and upgraders. And the oil and gas industry makes gray hydrogen so that they can make diesel, gasoline, naphtha, jet, all of those things require hydrogen to make them. And so we already know how to do this, but they are not yet looking at the future in the same way some of the smaller companies are. For example, I've been working with a small gas company. They have 200 years of natural gas reserves, and they want to put a pipeline into the west coast of BC and move LNG out that corridor. But if you're smart about it, you're going to make that pipeline hydrogen capable when you put it in, so that you can switch to hydrogen down the line. It will be way more lucrative for you than just LNG. And you're going to put in your liquefaction trains, you're going to make them hydrogen capable as well. And so just getting a little techie on you, when you have a liquefaction plant, you cool down the LNG to minus 161 Celsius. And then all the LNG natural gas turns into a liquid and leaves you with pure hydrogen. And then that hydrogen, you take it down another 90 degrees to, 20 degrees this side of absolute zero, but we do it, and now you've got liquid hydrogen you can load onto a ship and take over to Japan, and they're paying a premium for it right now. In fact, Russia, the two places in the world that can produce the cheapest hydrogen are Russia and Alberta, and Russia is now making a play to get into the Japanese market and give Australia a run for their money. So this is good. This is nothing but good news. Yeah.
Maggie, we probably just got a few more minutes for questions. So I've just scrolled up to the next sort of highest voted questions here. And I would suggest maybe just picking off ones that you feel.
Okay, the top one is, can hydrogen be moved as a liquid in a pipeline? Of course it can. How we do that is something called an LOHC, or liquid organic hydrogen carrier. And what happens there is we take a hydrocarbon like toluene, which is an organic solvent made from oil and gas, and we make this toluene and we load it up with until it's like prickly with hydrogen, and then we move it, and that's a compound called MCH, or methyl cyclohexane. Not that that matters, but we move that MCH down the pipeline prickly with hydrogen, and we can move 55 kilograms per cubic meter, 55 kilograms of hydrogen per cubic meter in the pipe, which is quite a bit. And we take it to where we want to offload that hydrogen. We heat it up to some degree. The hydrogen comes off, and then it turns back into toluene, and we take it back to where we loaded it up and load it up again. So it's a cycle. It's like a cycle, but the hydrocarbon doesn't burn. It doesn't release carbon. It's just a carrier. So that's one way to do it. Yeah. Another way, well, that's the one way. That's the way as a liquid. Yeah. Next.
There's an interesting question here around, the comment around big picture, big cost ideas. What are some of those pragmatic steps, the smaller achievable steps of how we move along? I know you've shared some already, Maggie. Anything else you want to comment there?
These are big picture, big cost ideas, and there's no getting around that. If we want to move forward with any kind of speed, that's what we have to do. I am particularly in favor of West-East Energy Corridor, because if Canada, the feds invest in that in a big way, that means every single province is going to have work and jobs and, to install that thing. It's going to really kickstart our economy in every province, across. And we're going to need takeoffs that go up to the territories too. So it's, in terms of small achievable steps, the canyon is big, and take a small achievable step and you head into the bottom of the canyon. But having said that, if we did like the UK does and government backstop of smaller projects, then we could get our teeth into the supply chain needed for that. And one example would be, what if we were to build the next whole new residential development in Calgary or Edmonton or Saskatoon, and what if we did that in a way that it was just a hydrogen community, right? And not only that, I'd put solar panels on every house and a little vertical axis, quiet wind turbine in every place. And I'd put in vanadium flow batteries on every block, and people would, we'd have green electricity and we'd have hydrogen. And that's what I'd be doing as a smaller step to go forward. Yeah. Hope that answers your question.